President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, the overdose epidemic is ravaging communities all across this country and leaving a trail of death and destruction. The latest data shows we lost nearly 107,000 Americans last year alone. The majority of those deaths were attributed to fentanyl, a synthetic opioid made from precursors shipped from China mainly to Mexico, where they're then manufactured. Fentanyl alone is killing 70,000 Americans a year. On average, we're talking about more than 190 people dying each day due to fentanyl. That's more people than a commercial 737 airliner can hold. So imagine the public outrage if day after day, commercial airliners fell out of the sky, killing everyone aboard. Well, you can imagine what the reaction would be. Social media would erupt. People would protest, and our constituents wouldn't just ask us to intervene, they would demand it. Unfortunately, and this is a mystery to me, the fentanyl epidemic and the drug overdose deaths that we've seen in the last year doesn't get the same sort of response. It's as though our threshold for outrage now is so high that even the death of 107,000 Americans would not achieve that threshold. We know this epidemic does not discriminate. It kills people of all ages and backgrounds from major cities and small towns all across America. But one of the most alarming trends that we see is the appalling trend of fentanyl-related deaths among teenagers. These teens frequently think they're buying something else, such as a Percocet or OxyContin or Xanax, and unknowingly they end up with a counterfeit pill contaminated with a deadly dose of fentanyl. This is the case for students in Hays County, which is just southwest of Austin, where I live. Since last summer, the Hays Consolidated Independent School District has lost 5 students to fentanyl poisoning. In October, I had the chance to meet with the parents of one of those students, Shannon McConville, who lost her 17-year-old son, Kevin, to fentanyl poisoning. She told me that Kevin was full of promise, a talented person, an artist. And after graduating, he wanted to join the Navy and become an underwater welder. But sadly, Kevin was never able to realize his dream. He died just a few weeks before the beginning of his senior year. A couple of weeks ago, I traveled to Hays County to speak with more families who have lost their children to fentanyl poisoning, as well as law enforcement personnel, school officials, and medical professionals trying to figure out what do we need to do. I saw Shannon and her husband, Darren, as well as the parents of another young victim, 15-year-old Noah Rodriguez. Noah's parents, Brandon and Janelle, told me that Noah was a genuine, kind young man and something of a jokester. He was an athlete, a devoted friend, and a big brother to his 3 siblings, the youngest of whom was only 2 weeks old when Noah died. Despite their profound loss, these parents and countless others are committed to raising awareness. You can imagine the courage it takes to overcome your grief and pain to try to share your story with others so that others might live. I had the opportunity to learn about the Fighting Fentanyl public awareness campaign in Hays County, as well as the work being done by school leaders and law enforcement. We all acknowledge that there is no single action that will end this epidemic. We can't just focus on prevention or treatment or drug diversion. A successful strategy will involve all 3 of those. We need buy-in from leaders at every level of government, as well as healthcare providers, schools, nonprofits, law enforcement, and, of course, the general public, just like the approach that we're seeing in Hays County. This has to be an all-in effort. But during our discussion, there was broad agreement that the starting point should be the source of these drugs, which is our southern border. All four parents stressed the importance of securing the border and preventing fentanyl from ever reaching our communities. Sharon McConville said that when it comes to the border, that the Biden administration is failing. I agree. Last week, 5 of my Republican colleagues joined me for a series of tours and meetings in the Rio Grande Valley where they got to see the administration's security failures firsthand. By my calculation, that's about the 10th delegation that either I or Senator Cruz or both of us have hosted of colleagues coming to the border in Texas. Border Patrol agents told us last weekend about the tactics that cartels use to traffic fentanyl and other dangerous drugs into the country. First and foremost, they distract and overwhelm agents by coordinating a surge of migrants, which provides a golden opportunity to sneak across the border undetected. Overwhelm the Border Patrol with a swarm of migrants and distract them while the drugs make their way north. This isn't news, of course, to the Biden administration. It's a well-known maneuver used by the cartels, acknowledged by the Attorney General of the United States last week when he came before the Senate Judiciary Committee. But for some reason, the administration seems determined to just simply look the other way. President Biden's apathetic approach to the southern border must change in order for us to have a chance at addressing this public health crisis. Just think about a burst pipe in your home. If water's pouring from the ceiling, what do you do first? Well, you aren't going to go grab buckets and towels to start cleaning the water while it's still raining down. You're going to turn the main water supply off and stop the leak at its source. And that's what we need to do here, cut off the supply. Until that happens, we're going to be fighting a losing battle, and more people will die. It's well known that the southern border is a major gateway for illegal drugs. In the last 12 months, Customs and Border Protection has seized 23,000 pounds of fentanyl at the southern border, enough to wipe out the entire U.S. population many times over. That's a daunting statistic, but we know this number isn't the full story. It only includes the drugs that our law enforcement officials were able to stop. And we know from all the deaths and the wide availability of fentanyl and other illegal drugs in America that much more than that makes its way into the interior of our country. So there's no exact way to know how much fentanyl has slipped through the cracks, but the fact that we're losing 70,000 Americans a year to fentanyl is proof that we aren't batting a perfect game, far from it. And let's not forget the fact that law enforcement at every level is also encountering and attempting to stop the fentanyl proliferation. Last month, the Collin County Sheriff's Office and North Texas Sheriff's Crime Interdiction Unit arrested a Dallas man with about 6,000 fentanyl pills in his vehicle during a traffic stop. Last year, the Drug Enforcement Administration seized more than 379 million lethal doses of fentanyl, enough to kill every American. Drug trafficking is obviously a lucrative business, and cartels take the advantage of every security gap in order to make money. There's no question that the ongoing border crisis has provided the perfect opportunity for these cartels who care nothing about people. All they care about is the money. If Border Patrol agents are changing diapers and passing out meals, as they've had to do to manage the volume of migrants coming across the border, They can't patrol the front lines and stop cartels from trafficking these dangerous drugs into the interior. I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that every migrant that comes across is responsible for the drugs coming across the border, far from it. But the mass movement of people orchestrated by these transnational criminal organizations, even including people with legitimate asylum claims, opens the opportunity, gateways, if you will, for truly dangerous criminals and substances to come across the border. And unless something changes, it's going to get worse. In order to save lives, we've got to secure the border and stop fentanyl from reaching our communities. That should be the first step. As a matter of fact, the President in his State of the Union last month said that he wanted members of Congress to pass his plan to provide the officers and equipment needed to secure the border. Now that surprised me because I wasn't aware that the President had a plan. But there's no question that border security legislation is needed, and those resources are necessary. We need to strengthen this combination of technology, boots on the ground, and infrastructure that Border Patrol tells me is the key to successfully securing the border. And that's the only way to stop dangerous drugs and criminals who mingle in with economic migrants and others, asylum seekers, to make their way across the border into the interior of the United States. But there's no doubt we also need to reform the asylum process to ensure that personnel, technology, and infrastructure can properly focus on interdicting narcotics and other contraband. Anyone who questions the need for these measures should talk to the parents who've had to bury their children, the brothers and sisters who've lost a sibling, the teenagers who are grieving at the unexpected loss of healthy and vibrant friends. We owe it to them and to the countless people who are terrified by this looming threat to stop these drugs at the source. And obviously what we are doing now is not sufficient. It's not working. I heard, again, Attorney General Garland say, well, we're doing everything we can. And that's not true. He may think he's doing everything he can, but obviously it isn't working, and we can't accept failure. We've got to come up with a formula to address this, as we did yesterday during an open hearing in the Intelligence Committee, where I asked the leaders of our national security agencies, what else can you offer? What other resources, what other authorities do you need in order to stop this dying of people who are taking fentanyl and other illegal drugs coming across the border? But it starts with securing the border, and we'll be fighting a continuing losing battle until that's done. I yield the floor.